Robservations with Meyer Burnett.
And I have to say that one of I think my pet peeves about movies, especially movies involving, well, young people in the last, say, 20, 25 years, people are just too damn good looking. Doesn't matter what movie you're watching, like you go, any movie set in a high school, like everybody is too good looking. And if they're not too good looking and they're supposed to be like geeky losers or nerds or whatever, they're cliche. I just feel like realism, it's all sort of been lost. And it bothers me because I sort of came of age watching movies in the 70s. And in the 70s, the people that were on our screens were people like Roy Scheider and Gene Hackman, or strange-looking people like maybe a younger Bruce Dern, or even Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson, a handsome guy, but he looked real. He looked like somebody you might meet on the street. Even Al Pacino, with his matinee idol good looks, especially when he was in Godfather 2, he still seemed like he lived in the real world. Now, that's not to say Hollywood has always given us beautiful people, but I think in the days of yore, there was something about the way people looked, the way they were gussied up. They were larger than life almost. Sure, you would get a Humphrey Bogart or somebody like that, and they were unconventionally handsome. But in the black and white films, maybe it's just my own rose-colored glasses, but people they were supposed to be more larger than life. But in the 70s, we had that transition from sort of that Hollywood model into that maverick model of people making movies like, well, Easy Rider or the Godfather movies or things like that. And there was a naturalism that came into movies. And even people who were starring in films, in my mind, you believed them more. They seemed, even someone like a William Hurt, when he shows up in Altered States and then Body Heat in the early 80s, very handsome guy, but still a guy that you might encounter in real life. And that was something that I've always been interested in. And as the viceroy of verisimilitude, I'm always keenly aware of, do I believe the people that I'm watching on screen, the ones that are inhabiting the stories that are being told? Like, I'll give you an example. One of the movies that I always held up as sort of being one of the last vestiges of 70s movies moving into 80s movies was Jaws, not 1, but Jaws 2. Because Jaws 2 is essentially a story about cruising teenagers, well, on a killer shark, but cruising teenagers instead of going down Van Nuys Boulevard or being in Modesto like in American Graffiti or something like that. They were on catamarans. And here's the exciting cast of young people. Not a very good picture. I took it off the internet. But look at all of them. They all looked relatively normal. You believe them. They're from a seaside community, Amity Island, obviously, and they look naturalistic. They look like real people. And even John Hughes, when John Hughes started making films and he brought Molly Ringwald to the fore in something like 16 Candles, I think the thing about Molly Ringwald was she had an unconventional beauty to her. She didn't look like a pinup model. And I think as a result of that, she was very interesting to watch, whether it was in 16 Candles or The Breakfast Club. You really felt there was an accessibility there because she felt real. I believed her as Andy in 16 Candles. And that's what I liked. Even Andrew McCarthy, he's pretty much like a matinee idol, but John Cryer as Ducky had a quirkiness to him, and it worked. Nowadays, I keep thinking when I really noticed things were changing was Rachel Lee Cook in She's All That. There's Rachel Lee Cook in She's All That. And Rachel Lee Cook is supposed to be this nerd girl. And I remember watching this film always thinking, well, Rachel Lee Cook she's a beautiful girl. She's not a nerd, but you're supposed to believe she's a nerd. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, she ends up going to she puts on makeup and a dress, and she goes from what this is supposed to be nerd girl to the girl that anybody would be proud to take anywhere. And I just was like, wait, couldn't anybody see through the fact that when you're going to school, you might look like this, you might be nerd girl, but hey, you go out on a Friday night and you can transform into this? No one saw that? I was always like, huh. Now, I was thinking also about, like, performers that I thought were striking when I first saw them. Meryl Streep being one of them. Here's Meryl Streep in Woody Allen's Manhattan. Now, obviously, Meryl Streep, especially with that cascading hair, is a beautiful woman. But there's something classical about her. She almost has a painterly quality to her face. I mean, she looks like she could be out of any era. Like, here she is in the miniseries Holocaust. I mean, look at her face. This is a woman of timeless beauty. She doesn't look like, again, like a pinup model, but her beauty sort of transcends the era in which she exists in, and I like that. I like that. Take a look at this. Do you know who this is? This is Charlize Theron. Charlize Theron, that's her as Eileen Wuornos in Patty Jenkins' Monster. We all know what Charlize Theron looks like. She looks like this, or she looks like this. But in the film Monster, she was fearless because she decided to look like this. She put on the pounds. She did the work. I mean, I think she's wearing messed up teeth there, but I don't even know. This is an amazing commitment to performance. And I love that. I think that's amazing. Which brings me to Carey Mulligan. Carey Mulligan, who is currently starring in Promising Young Woman that was made by Margot Robbie's production house, Lucky Chap Productions. Well, there was a little brouhaha that happened when Promising Young Woman premiered at Sundance. A Variety critic named Dennis Harvey reviewed the film back on January 26th, 2020, and in his review, he had a problem with the premise of Promising Young Woman, that Carey Mulligan might not be, let's say, believable in the role of a woman that's seeking revenge by going out and seducing men in bars, feigning drunkenness. They would take her home, that kind of craziness, and then she would turn the tables on them. So, once again, Carey Mulligan, who, in my mind, is one of the great actresses of our generation. And I am a huge, huge fan of Carey Mulligan. If you haven't seen movies like An Education, or you haven't seen Never Let Me Go, Carey Mulligan is an incredibly versatile actress, and there's something about her, like, I don't know what it is, maybe it's her voice. She just touches my soul. I love her as a performer. But so, Dennis Harvey posted in his review that she wasn't, or alluded to the fact that she wasn't hot enough, like, to be believable as a woman that would attract men. And let's just take a look at her again in the thumbnail. Here's how she appears in Promising Young Woman. Now, just let me tell you, I know she's dressed up. There's a part of the movie this is specifically from, but let me tell you, I don't care what universe you're in, but if you're in a bar and you meet a girl like this and she's talking to you, I don't care whether she's drunk, whether she's not drunk, you're having a good night. And if you hear her voice, it's even better. So anyway, what happened was Dennis Harvey in his review made a comment that he thought it strained credulity that someone like her would attract so many guys. Now, I understand every man has different tastes, but one of the things that I love about Carey Mulligan, and what I've always loved about Carey Mulligan, and maybe it's a taste thing for me too, but I've always thought that Carey Mulligan has a beauty the same way that Meryl Streep had a beauty when you first saw it. She transcended the time in which she was in, and then add to the fact that she's an incredible actress. The same thing I feel is true of Carey Mulligan, that there's a beauty, there's a timeless quality to her beauty. She feels like she might be from another age or something, and then you couple that with the fact that she is an amazing actress. And also, she's a mom of two. But I love Carey Mulligan, and so the comment that Dennis Harvey made was really pretty much under the radar for 11 months or something. And then, of course, Promising Young Woman finally gets released. It's on VOD right now. I recommend watching it. And it has a really sort of a, well, I wanted to read an article so you know what it's, this isn't really, well, maybe it is a little spoilerific. I don't know. If you haven't seen it, maybe not, but I wanted to read this article. This article is from Woman's Agenda. Promising Young Woman, a film that could only have been made by a woman, by Shivani Gopal. This was from 4 weeks ago. Promising Young Woman was made by Margot Robbie's production house, Lucky Chap Productions, along with Emerald Fennell as the writer-director. As a woman, there's a good chance that watching A Promising Young Woman will leave you screaming, "Me too," with every fiber of your being. In fact, I can't ever recall a time that I've walked out of the cinema so hot with rage, yet oddly cold and focused with anger, all the while having my eyes heavy and in need of a good, solid cry. Until now. Why? The movie makes you feel somewhat validated, listened to, and finally acknowledged after what feels like going through most of your life being seemingly gaslighted for sounding crazy when calling out the bad behavior of good guys who act in good fun. This is a film that gets the portrayal of the villain right. You see, the people who so aggrieve Carey Mulligan's character aren't the dangerous-looking random guys who try to follow you home. No, they're everyday people, the ones you look up to, try and impress, and want to get along with. Even the guys who we, the audience, are supposed to despise are just that, ordinary guys. The kind his best man would vouch for at his wedding. Telling tales about what a great guy he is, and maybe even crack the odd joke or two about his awkward failings in the past, only to finally land on his feet to find his one true love. The kind of guy who went through a stupid phase of boys being boys, just mucking around, but then he got his shit together finally, pulled up his socks, and now he's a responsible young man. The seemingly normal villains conjure up a Brett Kavanaugh-esque protagonist, someone who might have screwed up in his youth, but he's since scrubbed up nice and clean. A respectable citizen with polo shirts and beige chinos to match, and yet the damage done of the past is swept under the rug. Except it's not forgotten, and it's never cleanly compartmentalized under the rug for the women who've experienced assault or the people helping them to pick up the pieces. Cassie, the character that Mulligan plays, portrays the heartbreaking damage painfully well. As a non-movie buff, non-critic, or someone who would even remotely identify as an enthusiast, enough to know the names, histories, and careers of those who give us these boons of entertainment, or in this case, a sheer emotion-jerking roller coaster, there was still something that was breathtakingly clear to me. This film could only have been made by a woman, or make that a team of women. And so, I don't necessarily think that's true, but I understand where she's coming from. And so, like any non-movie buff would do, I came home and looked up the team that brought the film to life. Of course, my hunch was right. A Promising Young Woman was made by Margot Robbie's production house, Lucky Chap Productions, along with Emerald Fennell as the writer-director. For those who are equally and somewhat embarrassingly non-aware of the film industry as I am, Fennell also played Camille Bowles in Netflix's The Crown. She's clearly a woman of many talents. So how did I know the film was made by a woman as I cringed, laughed, and cried? Only a woman could have picked the offenders out with such realism, and only a woman could have called out the attempted gaslighting of man's worst nightmare. Spoiler alert, it's been accused of sexual assault. With such ease while portraying the dangers of revenge-seeking vigilantism to reflect the very real nightmares of women's lives, and one that sadly plays out all too often, even without the revenge-seeking. Mulligan's character, Cassie, during her vigilante escapades, "Who are you?" asks during her vigilante escapades, "Who are you?" And it echoes such an important question. What are we doing? Why are we still giving rape culture the benefit of the doubt? Why do we let seemingly good guys get away with casual misogyny? Every time an action or comment gets swept under the rug, ask yourself, what are you doing? After all, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. I, for one, am so glad that women are finally in the movie-making business. Thank you, Margot Robbie, Emerald Fennell, and Carey Mulligan for bringing this to life. You've invoked some hard conversations on the drive back home from the cinemas and those back to the office water cooler, Zoom chats, and no doubt, but they're the ones we finally need to have. So I thought that was a pretty interesting article about how women have, especially women that aren't necessarily film pundits or movie fans in general, have responded to this movie. And there's a lot of really tough questions that are asked by the film. But anyway, back to the review in Variety. So the review in Variety made this comment that they didn't necessarily believe that Carey Mulligan was this femme fatale that any guy could, or that men were desired. You know, you're out at a bar and you would see her, and the point was made that maybe Margot Robbie would be better. This was irksome to me. It was irksome to me as the viceroy of verisimilitude and somebody who has both produced and directed movies. Because the thing is, if you had Margot Robbie in the central role, Margot Robbie who ended up looking like, say, how she looked in The Wolf of Wall Street, girls like that you don't see very often in bars, drunk because, and trying to, Carey Mulligan, her character, is being seducing of these men for a reason. I won't get into why, but I wouldn't have believed Margot Robbie in that role, but I believe Carey Mulligan because Carey Mulligan's beauty seems more natural. I love Margot Robbie. I think she's a tremendous performer, and when she does something like I, Tonya, she, like Charlize Theron, is fearless. She's not somebody who's really too worried about her looks. She probably has a lot more, she's more secure in being able to really lose herself in the role. So that's commendable. But someone like Carey Mulligan, I believe Carey Mulligan is somebody who would be out at night. She reminds me of somebody, people I've met in bars in Los Angeles in the 30 years I've lived here. I think her casting in the film was perfect. I thought she was tremendous in the film. And, you know, it really added to, I thought, the believability of it. So anyway, what has happened subsequent? So 11 months go by. Now I'm going to read an article. I don't know if you guys read. He's a pretty divisive figure as far as film pundits go, but I've been reading Jeffrey Wells and Hollywood Elsewhere for years. He actually was very complimentary when Free Enterprise came out, and whether he's kind of a film journalist people either read religiously and other people they don't like him very much. I do like him. I think a lot of what he writes is kind of theater, but there's a lot of people that don't like him for various reasons, and they might not be wrong. I read him every single day. I always have. Full disclosure, I even give him $5 a month for his column because I appreciate it. I've been reading it for so long. Anyway, he talked about what has happened with critic Dennis Harvey, who wrote this review. And it's now because Promising Young Woman has come out. The review has been found. Variety republished it. And the fact that Dennis Harvey said he didn't believe Carey Mulligan was hot enough, basically, to pull off, in a nutshell, to pull off this role has caused something of a brouhaha. So let me read Jeffrey Wells' column. And people have jumped in, both pro and con. Some people you might know. The National Society of Film Critics stands up to Mulligan coddling, Harvey dissing Variety. It's been roughly 6.5 weeks since Variety editors threw longtime critic Dennis Harvey under the bus by posting an apology for his 1/6/21 review of Promising Young Woman, which had been edited by Variety's Peter DeBruge and had sat on the Variety website for 11 months without anyone saying boo. Variety groveled and kowtowed because Carey Mulligan had complained about a certain paragraph in the review to New York Times columnist Kyle Buchanan on 12/23/20. Let me see if I can jump over here. Carey Mulligan won't let Hollywood off the hook. The actress delivered the performance of her career in the dark comedy Promising Young Woman. Then came those with their tired views of women. Not every Carey Mulligan movie begins with the Charlie XCX song, but maybe more of them should. When Promising Young Woman deploys the 2017 Pop Bop Boys in its opening moment, it's the first sign you're about to get something from Mulligan that you're not used to, namely a contemporary setting. I know that for a cinema audience, I'm just constantly in period costume, Mulligan said recently, shrugging her shoulders in an oversized red sweater. She was video chatting with me from her British country house in Devon, where she had sequestered herself in a darkened music room typically used by her husband, Marcus Mumford, from the band Mumford & Sons. A single solitary lamp illuminated her, as a single solitary lamp often does with Mulligan. You'll find little more than the meager light source in many of the 35-year-old actress's most recent movies, which include Far from the Madding Crowd, set around 1870, Suffragette, about equal rights protests in 1912 Britain, and Mudbound, which begins in the year 1939. It has been nearly a decade since Mulligan starred in a modern-day film, Steve McQueen's Shame from 2011, a span of time that initially surprised even her. But then she goes on and she talks about the Variety article and complained about it. And I think, well, rightfully so. Rightfully so. I'm going to put this article in the live chat if you would like to read it. And you should. So, she said, I read the Variety review because I'm a weak person, Mulligan told Buchanan, and I took issue with it. It felt like it was basically saying that I wasn't hot enough to pull off this kind of ruse. And so Variety rushed right in, apologized to Carey Mulligan, and by inference Focus Features, and posted the following above Harvey's review. Editor's note, Variety sincerely apologizes to Carey Mulligan and regrets the insensitive language and insinuation in our review of Promising Young Woman that minimized her daring performance. A few of us, this is Jeff Wells again, a few of us, myself, the Anklers' Richard Rushfield, Collider's Jeff Snyder, author and former Variety critic Joseph McBride, The Guardian's Peter Bradshaw, Across the Movie Aisle podcasters Sonny Bunch, Alyssa Rosenberg, and Peter Suderman, have tweeted, written, and podcasted about Variety's appalling behavior over the last few weeks. But today, the National Society of Film Critics finally stepped in and did the gutsy thing. So, okay, they could have done it sooner. They needed to think about all the ramifications and consider all the angles and dot all the I's and cross all the T's for the last 5 or 6 weeks. But at least they grew a pair and manned up. Hollywood elsewhere salutes their courage, and so does Pike Bishop in heaven. Here's their statement. From the National Society of Film Critics regarding Variety's apology for its Promising Young Woman review. Now remember, Variety apologized 11 months after this review was written, when Carey Mulligan specifically called this review out. We, the members of the National Society of Film Critics, wish to register our alarm at Variety's shabby treatment of our colleague Dennis Harvey. On January 26th, 2020, Variety published Harvey's review of the movie Promising Young Woman from the Sundance Film Festival. Full disclosure, the review was edited by Peter DeBruge, Variety's chief film critic and member of the NSFC, the National Society of Film Critics. While praising the film, Harvey wrote that Carey Mulligan, a fine actress, seems a bit of an odd choice as the movie's many-layered apparent femme fatale protagonist, noting distancing aspects of the character's costuming, hairstyling, and vocal delivery. He went on to praise Mulligan's performance as skillful, entertaining, and challenging, even when the eccentric method obscures the precise message. On December 24th, 2020, almost a year later, and in the thick of award season, Mulligan noted her objections to Harvey's review in a New York Times profile. It felt like it was basically saying I wasn't hot enough to pull off this kind of ruse. Mulligan, like any artist, is within her rights to respond to criticism of her work, just as we are within our rights to assert that nothing in Harvey's review, which focuses on the actor's stylized presentation, not her attractiveness, supports her claim. But differences of opinion in the evaluation of a film or a performance are not at issue here. What concerns us is Variety's subsequent decision to place an editor's note at the top of the review. Variety sincerely apologizes to Carey Mulligan and regrets the insensitive language and insinuation in our review of Promising Young Woman that minimized her daring performance. If Variety felt the language in Harvey's review was insensitive and insinuating, it had the option of working with him to fix that in the editing process before the review ran. There are also ways Variety could have acknowledged and responded to Mulligan's criticism rather than simply capitulating to it and undermining its own critic in the process. The imposition of a subjective value judgment her daring performance as a flat editorial perspective, as if it were a matter of inarguable fact rather than opinion, is particularly inappropriate. We believe the editor's note should be removed. Like any journalism, film criticism often displeases those being written about, and like any journalists, film critics must have the support of their publications when that displeasure, usually coming from people far more powerful than any journalist, is made known, especially when that publication claims to report on the industry those powerful people inhabit. It is appalling that, in this instance, Variety chose to side with that power rather than supporting its writer. The current National Society of Film Critics chairman is LA Times critic Justin Chang. By the way, great critic. The executive director is Liz Weiss. So that was what Jeffrey Wells was reporting on. Now, what I find interesting about this whole thing is, well, twofold. First, the idea of, I think, people love all kinds of people. Everybody has different tastes. People, men especially, like all kinds of different women, just like women, especially, like all different kinds of men. And I think it's okay when we're commenting on those things. I gave you my thoughts about how I believe that people, especially young people, are just too damn good looking. I don't believe them anymore. It's like watching a catalog as opposed to a show. And one of the things that I've always found appealing, as I said, about Carey Mulligan is she can inhabit, I think, almost any role. And while, yes, she's a little bit typecast in what she can do, I think she's incredibly striking. She's an amazing performer. And for whatever reason, maybe it's the cadence of her voice, I immediately connect with her on screen when I watch anything that she does, especially, as I said, in An Education and Never Let Me Go. Her performance in that movie is just heartbreaking, and I love it. I can't speak highly enough about one of my favorite science fiction films of the last 20 years. But the idea that film criticism, that somebody, especially if you're writing for a publication now, I sit there and bang on about Star Trek Discovery all the time. But if I were to meet, and I did actually, I met at Comic-Con 2 years ago, I met one of the producers of Star Trek Discovery. I went right up to him because he and I were going at each other one day on Twitter. And I walked up to him and I went a little too far. I apologized to him. I didn't sit there and change my opinion. If I met Alex Kurtzman, I would say, Mr. Kurtzman, it's a pleasure to meet you. If it came up, I would say I'm really not a fan of anything that you do, but I'm sure I could have a nice conversation with him, because I do respect the fact that even though I might not like what he's making, I certainly respect his ability to get things made. And I would contact or talk to somebody as far as that goes. But what I find so interesting about this whole story is, so you go from the verisimilitude of movies, that's one thing, but to comment on something, to be a reviewer, and to have a review up on a site for 11 months, and it's not like he came out and bashed Carey Mulligan. I disagree with his assessment of her. I think that she was perfectly cast in the film, and I think what was even better is every actor brings baggage with them into a film, and the fact that she's been in these period pieces, that she's played these kinds of, well, let's just say call her a nice girl or an introspective girl or a woman that has deeply felt feelings. I think all of that really worked well for the role she was playing in Promising Young Woman. And I think, by the way, that's probably why she was cast. And never once did I ever think, I don't believe this girl couldn't. I mean, men are pigs. I'll admit it. If we smell blood in the water and maybe there's a little time to maybe get something, guys are stupid. We're dumb. And I say that with the greatest respect. We are dumb, and I'll tell you why. We're even dumber because nobody teaches us. I've often thought in school we get sex education, but nobody teaches us sexuality. You're supposed to get manners from your mom and your dad, but men and women don't really, I don't know, are manners still taught anymore? Does anybody read Emily Post? Does anyone even know who Emily Post is these days? But, I mean, you should. And I think it's pretty interesting that this happened. But so this reviewer makes this commentary. Carey Mulligan brings it up in an interview, which suddenly draws attention to an 11-month-old review. Variety then, oh, we're so appalled. Everybody gets their knives out and starts sharpening their knives and is coming out after a reviewer and goes after him. And then Variety apologizes for something they've had up on their own website for 11 months. They throw their own critic under the bus rather than stand by him, because that's the world that we live in. You know, we would rather capitulate. Look, I'm not going to suddenly start telling people that I love Star Trek Discovery because, oh, you shouldn't hurt people's feelings. I mean, sure, if I want to work on Star Trek, probably not going to happen for a number of reasons. You know, I mean, if I got a call, I would go work on Star Trek, but I would flat out say, I think this show sucks, but I'm going to come to work on it because maybe I can make it better. That's kind of what I've done my whole life. And if you'll let me, I'll make your show better for you in my own small way. But I think that I think it's important that, you know, if you're writing for somebody or you're an employee of someone's and you've done work for them and they didn't do any kind of, or they didn't do the due diligence, they published the article. They didn't seem to have a problem with it 11 months ago. It was only when the person who's mentioned in the article calls them out, oh, we're sorry. Like, have a backbone, man. You know? I mean, I think you can stand up for people, and it's not like he was being insulting. He actually was saying things that were fairly complimentary to her performance. And I think that, but to speak in Carey Mulligan's defense, I also think that she was terrific in the role, and it never would have come up with me that I would have expected Margot Robbie. I would not have believed Margot Robbie being sloppy drunk at a bar by herself to pick up dudes. And if she was sloppy drunk by herself, the dudes that she's going to pick up, it wouldn't have worked, especially if they had her, maybe if she dressed down the way she looked in I, Tonya, but it's very hard to make Margot Robbie look anything less than Margot Robbie. And for me, I think her performance and her accent in Wolf of Wall Street, not only is she an incredible actress, but she can also be just about the hottest thing going, one of the hottest women ever to appear in film, especially in that particular movie. So, I don't know. Would she have been the best person to play the lead role? I'd like to believe, since her production company developed it, she actually thought it was a better idea that Carey Mulligan play the role. So you got two things going on here. You've got, in my mind, the verisimilitude of casting. What makes a movie believable? You know? I mean, and if you're a good casting director, you realize that Charlize Theron can look like this, and she can also look like this. And it's a fearless actress that will allow herself to look like this. And that's why she's a great actress. And, you know, I think that Carey Mulligan can pretty much do the same kind of thing. Your tastes might move more toward Charlize Theron than Carey Mulligan, but I don't know. I'll tell you something. I see this face, and I hear her voice, and I'm like, man, she can play any role in my book. But then there's the idea of, well, film criticism. And are you supposed to be nice to the films that you're criticizing? I mean, I don't think it's personal. I don't think it's, you know, maybe it was the reviewer's personal taste that he's not a big Carey Mulligan fan, but ultimately he's calling it like he sees it, or she's calling it like she sees it. Doesn't matter who's reviewing the film. But you know what? If you're employing somebody, unless they've done something like, oh, I don't know, pulled an Army Hammer, if you want to go topical, unless something like that's going on, you got to stick up for the people that work for you. You can't throw them under the bus unless they've done something, you know, like I said, truly egregious that's borders on criminal. But if somebody has an opinion and you're hiring them, or you've already hired them and they're working for you, I think it was poor form to do what Variety did in this case. And anyway, what do you think? I don't know. Do you think about this kind of stuff? Maybe this is a little bit too inside baseball. I don't know. But it was just something that I was thinking about on a number of levels. So I figured I would share it with all of you today.